Okay, so we are starting the next panel discussion about upscaling and commercialization in the hydrogen business. And I would like to introduce the four panelists for you. Starting from my left side, Holger Mathiesen. And I have to read your CV from my paper. I'm sorry. Holger, we know each other a long time, but you are Senior Vice President of Aker Offshore Wind right now. You have a long past in offshore wind, working for E.ON, RWE, and realizing the Arkona offshore wind farm. Then we have Christian Heine. He is the CEO of the Hamburger Energiewerke, so the Hamburger utility for district heating and electricity production, and a long history in the Hamburg energy system, especially the grid operators. Then we have Ulf Eriksen. He is Vice President for Hydrogen Statkraft. Also very warm welcome. And then last not least, Dr. Stefan Kaufmann. He is the Innovation Commissioner for Green Hydrogen for the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, BMBF, in Germany. And yes, you are the Commissioner for Green Hydrogen since June 2020, and very much working on pushing the hydrogen agenda in Germany, especially from the research perspective. Yes, so we will open the panel discussion with a short statement for each and everybody. So yes, please start, Holger. Upscaling and commercialization. What is your message?
Thank you very much, Jan, and thanks for inviting Aker to this panel discussion. So, I mean, this is all about decarbonization, as we all know, and here is a global need for the industry to decarbonize, particularly in shipping, in steel, in fertilizers, and hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular, as we feel is the solution. So although, as you said, Jan, offshore is close to my heart, I'm starting to like hydrogen almost as much as offshore wind. And I'm representing today here Aker Clean Hydrogen, the sister company of Aker Offshore Wind, which has particularly strengths in asset development and industrial experience since 180 years in Norway. And we like, from Aker Clean Hydrogen, to build and operate hydrogen assets in Norway and globally. Now, what is the target of hydrogen production? It needs to be safe, it needs to be affordable, and it needs to be easy. That's, I think, the main aim. How do we do that, or how do we want to achieve that from Aker? Is simplifying the processes, it's benefiting from economies of scale, and it's digitalization. We also aim to do multi-contracting approach in those projects that we are currently preparing for realization on relatively short notice. And we aim to work closely with all participants involved. So in short, we would like to use our know-how from oil and gas, from renewables, from industrialization over the past 180 years to decarbonize the entire value chain. And this, in particular, in the context of the Norwegian German energy cooperation. And I'm looking forward to discuss that here with the other panelists.
Okay, thank you, Holger. Christian, CEO of a natural gas grid operator in Hamburg, and big ambitions with hydrogen. What is your opening statement?
Many thanks, Jan. I'm happy to be here. And about 2.5 years ago, the Federal Ministry of the Economy called for project proposals under the funding umbrella of IPSI Hydrogen, and about 200...
Just a second, the microphone. We need a microphone, sorry.
And about 230 project proposals were submitted to the Federal Ministry, and then the Ministry kind of selected the national shortlist. And we've been really happy that out of the 61 project proposals that made it on the national shortlist, 8 of which came from Hamburg. All included the hydrogen network, the Hamburg Hydrogen Network, and covering the entire value chain, from production to distribution to the various use cases. So we are involved with the production side of it. We are proposing together with Shell and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries the building of a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, and Vattenfall is a strategic partner at the Moorburg site, a former coal-fired power plant that got out of operation in the last year. We as Hamburger Energiewerke, also to make this project extremely efficient, are the off-takers for the heat that's produced in the process of electrolysis. 100 megawatt means roughly 13 to 20 megawatt waste heat. And as the district heating operator, we have an extreme interest to use these 13 to 20 megawatt. We also want to use the oxygen that's produced in the process for industrial process in Hamburg. Since we run one coal plant in Wedel that's going to be replaced by a new gas-fired CHP here in Hamburg, and we use two gas turbines, SQT 800, two Siemens gas turbines that are already H2 ready, up to 30%. So we are a potential off-taker of hydrogen as well. And our partner, the gas grid operator Hamburg, will build a 60-kilometer of hydrogen infrastructure, because you can imagine if you have a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, you can't transport it with a trailer logistic, because you produce roughly about 100 million cubic meter of hydrogen, and for this you need a pipeline infrastructure to bring it to the use cases, of which we have ArcelorMittal, a steel producing company in Hamburg, who use hydrogen also in the direct reduction process, as we've heard from Salzgitter. I don't know whether that's the exact same technological process, but that's where it's used. And we also have diverse projects in mobility where hydrogen will be used in heavy-duty vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, Ulf Eriksson, your presence here is written the competitiveness of green hydrogen. So, looking forward to your remarks on competitiveness.
Thanks a lot. And okay, is there a sound, or should I use the microphone?
There seems to be a problem with some microphones.
Is there a sound on this one? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Without it as well? Yeah. Okay, then I'll drop it. Yes. Oh, that was loud. Okay, so thanks for inviting me to this session and Statkraft. We highly appreciate it, and I think just looking around me now, I feel a bit like we're a big part of something that's going to be big. I think the collaboration between Norway and Germany, they are two very strong countries that supplement and complement each other, and I think we can achieve great things. So it's a pleasure to be here. I just want to say a couple of things about Statkraft first, as an introduction to the competitiveness issue. Statkraft is, as some of you may know, the largest producer of renewable power in Europe. So we have a 20,000 megawatt capacity in renewables that we own ourselves, and also a similar sized capacity that we operate on behalf of other companies. And the large size of that is actually in Germany. So handling renewable power is what we do on a day-to-day basis. And of course, behind that is a lot of analysis, etc. And our analysis clearly shows, like I think many others have pointed to in this room, that you need hydrogen to meet the climate targets. So you can get a little bit of the way by removing fossil power production, a little bit on electrification and batteries, but you also need to cut emissions in hard-to-abate sectors, and there you will need hydrogen. So that's also why Statkraft, as a renewable producer, are very eager to go into hydrogen. And we're building up currently a portfolio of projects in Norway, Sweden, and one in Emden in Germany. But we believe that we might also expand this. We have a strategy revision going on. So that's a bit on the background from our perspective. Maybe mention a couple of those projects as well before I go to your question. So one of the key projects is actually starting with transportation around the southern coast. Our partners from Skagerrak will tell a bit about more of that a bit later today. We have a project in Emden, which is also very exciting and links well with the others, both from land transport and sea transport perspective. So my colleague Matthias Holzenkamp is in charge of that. He's here as well. But finally, I think I would like to mention our project in Mo i Rana, where we look at providing hydrogen to for Celsa to produce green steel. I think that's one of the most interesting and one of the projects that's probably going to get online earliest. So our common aim is to be up and running by the end of 24. And I'll get back to that point on time and haste at the end of the intro. Then on the competitiveness, very quickly, I think Germany is a key example of how this can be achieved. So looking at the price for solar, from 2009 to 2019, it dropped by almost 90%. So that's massive. And that was driven, to a large extent, by EEG in Germany and the steep growth in solar panels in Germany. And what was the key there? Yes, it was to generate scale, to get scale production. Then the cost started to drop. And I think that's also a key word for our discussion here today. So, and the scale in renewables, it's interesting. This case is interesting for three reasons. First of all, it shows what the governments can do. Secondly, pushing down the price for renewables has made it closer to be competitive. And thirdly, we believe that the same development will also happen for electrolyzers if we start building scale. And there I think it's a very important task also for governments, etc., to see what they can do to help it. Because when I hear it now, it's of course, yes, we need a lot of new renewables, but we must not make that hinder us from starting the development. We need to do it now. We need to build this scale now because it's urgent. So that will be my sort of starting point for this discussion. We need to build scale and we need to start building it fast.
Okay, so upscaling and commercialization is the right title for it. Thank you for reminding us. Yes, last not least, Dr. Stefan Kaufmann from the Federal Ministry for Research and Education. What is your take on the current state of the hydrogen economy? Where are we standing from your perspective?
At first, I want to say that I'm very happy to be part of this German Norwegian Hydrogen Forum with a strong focus on northern Germany. Let me say this as somebody coming from Stuttgart. Then for sure I'm coming from the Ministry for Research and Education. And first point I want to say is that without public funded research for hydrogen technologies over the last decades, we were not even able to think about achieving climate neutrality or independence from Russian oil, from hydrogen until now. So talking about SALCOS, talking about producing green steel, talking about producing e-fuels, all the fuel cell technologies we developed over the last year. So that is the one point. We need research and technologies. We need research and development also right now for the market ramp up, in the ramp up, and also we have to do research on materials, next generation of electrolyzers, for example. Away from iridium, we talk about the efficiency of electrolyzers, about cracking ammonia, for example. It's not an existing technology, not on a bigger scale. Talking about certification of green hydrogen, about measurement of origin of hydrogen, for example. So there are a lot of things we have still in the pipeline, and so we need a lot of research and development still. And it's therefore why the Ministry of Research and Education launched 3 lead projects with 700 million euros of funding for scaling up the electrolyzer technologies, for offshore production of hydrogen, and for transport technologies to see how can we use existing pipeline, what transport infrastructures do we need, what ships do we need to ship the hydrogen or its derivatives over long distances. So this is what we do actually as Ministry for Research and Education, but not only we, also the other ministries doing a lot. And just to give you a figure, we have about 30 research institutes alone in the Fraunhofer Society dealing with hydrogen technologies. We have the big Helmholtz institutes, and we spend to Jülich 860 million euros for the next 70 years, only for the research center in Jülich for hydrogen research. So there's still a lot we have to do and we can do. And what is very important for the ministry, for my ministry, is an interlock between industry and research. And I have a very good example. We I had a delegation trip to Australia 2 weeks ago with the minister. and a big delegation with members of research and industry, and that was really a very, very good example to bring all our capacities together, going to Australia, showing them that we are really severe and interested in a cooperation with Australia, and that's what we are doing. We try to enable strong cooperation between industry and research, and that is what I think what is our strength in Germany, to bring green technology and green hydrogen in the future.
Okay, so you already mentioned a little bit, there's still enough to do in the field of research. I want to ask also the industry representatives, we're talking about upscaling, and basically we hear a lot of times, or I hear a lot of times, that the technology is available. We just need to upscale it. So what is your take on that? Is there still a lot of research to do? Is there still a lot of experience to learn from other sectors of the industry? I come from the wind industry. When we went offshore, we said it's just about upscaling, and then we learned a lot of different things. So where do you see research needs? Where do you think we need to develop technology further before upscaling, maybe? Holger.
Yeah, maybe I can give it a start. So let me first share that I would like to compliment the German government as well as the Norwegian governments. They have done, as Dr. Kaufmann illustrated, done a lot in the past, right? And we are at that level that we are currently talking today because of everything that has been supported over the past 1 or 2 decades. And to me, it is a sufficient level. It can never be enough, right? But I think we should also maybe pause for a second and state that the current level is really excellent. Where it's now getting more complicated, in my view, and we still need to do more research and development, is system integration. Right, so it's not about individual components that still need to be further developed when it comes to research and development, but it's the integration of the different components. That, I think, is where probably we need to focus a little bit more when it comes to the research and development activities, in order to facilitate that the efficiency and the economies of scales are being deployed as fast as possible.
Is that your take on? You're a system operator. So.
I certainly agree with Mr. Matthiesen, because I think there has been quite a lot of research and development in recent years to bring intentions into action, right? And there will, of course, be the necessity for further research and development, but I think with the technological advances that we've made, I think we have a very good starting point to really kind of wrap up. I think as far as the production of electrolyzers is concerned, I think we have to really get serial and mass production in order to bring costs down. And as far as the grid infrastructure is concerned, Professor Linke is here too from the German Association of the Grid Operators, and kind of knows that we've done a lot of studies to prove that the existing gas infrastructure can of course be used for hydrogen grid operation, right? Of course you have to clean the pipelines, you have to change some component parts, but in general, we can use an existing gas infrastructure to convert it into the transport of hydrogen, and I think that's an excellent starting point. So research and development is, of course, always good to kind of be extended in order to bring costs down, but I think we have a very good starting point at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Ulf?
Yeah, I think looking at there are 2 sides to this question. I think we should, as I started off saying in my initial statement, was that we should now focus mainly on getting the scale, build up scale. And the reason for that is I think that if we can make this a bit more commercial, make the scale and make this a market, then I think also it will be easier, it will generate new research, etc. That doesn't mean that there's not a need for research. I mean, there's a need for research in many areas of this. But just to give you an example, Nel has been producing electrolyzers for 100 years and maybe more than it used to be Norsk Hydro. And it has been in operation for that period of time. Yara, who will speak here later on, they have used electrolyzers, alkaline electrolyzers, for a similar amount of time. They actually stopped using them in 1990. So the technology, for that matter, exists already. But how is Nel producing these electrolyzers? Up until recently, I visited their factory in 2019. They actually produced it manually, lifting the plates by hand, spraying on membranes. In April, they opened their new factory in Herøya, which will do this automated and have a gigawatt capacity as a target. They might not start there this year, but So scaling up is very important, and then I think it will generate more research. And of course, there are needs for research in other areas, but I think now we need to get started.
Okay, yes, you mentioned before that it was basically Germany featuring the solar market development, yeah, with the feed-in tariff, with the Renewable Energies Act. I think that is a very good example, but it's not only about scaling up, it's also about setting a feed-in tariff, a financial mechanism that does give stability to the market, yeah? So maybe to Dr. Kaufmann, to develop a significant market volume, do we need some kind of financial system like a carbon contract for differences so that we see enough off-takers so that the market can really start pulling?
For sure, for the scale up we need, and for the market we need some instruments and some Anreize, incentives. And H2 Global is one of these very interesting incentives. And all over the world where we're traveling, everybody says H2 Global is really a wonderful instrument. It is a good instrument, but it needs to be funded in a much better way. So 900 million is a good starting point, but really to have an impact, I think we have to have other rounds with more funding. We will start now with the first 3 rounds, 300 million each in the next months. So this could be one of these incentives, carbon contracts for difference, for sure. There's a program in making in the Ministry of Economy. We have to look for the European regulation and what is possible. That could be an instrument. So for sure, that is what we have to do as a government, to look for incentives which are really working and helping the industry.
Right. Maybe to you, Christian Heine, from a systems and grid integrator, do you think we need something like that, a CCFD mechanism for production on site on a domestic scale, but also to facilitate import?
Well, I think incentives are promised, but it takes far too long for them to really kind of reach the market, right? I mean, there's been a lot of talk on CFDs, but we don't really have CFDs at the moment. The mechanisms are not defined yet. And the same goes a bit for the IPCEI process as well, right? It started about 2.5 years ago, and most of the companies that actually proposed projects are still waiting for the European notification. It takes far too long, I think. So I think we still have a very difficult environment for final investment decisions. You have to be quite honest about it. As far as the regulatory framework is concerned, maybe we also talk a bit about it later. As far as production is concerned, the delegated act, Dr. Clemens has already talked a bit about it, you know, the kind of criteria of additionality and time synchronicity, a time framework of 2027 that makes it extremely difficult to take a decision because we don't really know how the regulatory framework will look like. As far as distribution is concerned, I mean, look at the gas market package that the EU was proposing on the note of strict legal ownership unbundling, right? That means that a current gas grid operator is in future not allowed to operate a hydrogen grid. Now, what nonsense is that if we have proven that the existing gas infrastructure can well be used for the transport of hydrogen? And as far as the industry is concerned, CFDs are necessary, I suppose, in order to kind of reach a level where we don't write LOEs or MOUs, but kind of make real direct contracts so everyone can actually take the final investment decision.
Maybe also from my mic is off. Quite spontaneous system. Maybe from a Norwegian perspective, Norwegian industries, so we need some kind of financial regulation, a CCFD kind of system. But I understand from Christian, we need a simple and understandable system. Yeah. So from your point of view, how do you view on the European Union and the developments that are on the table right now? Is that helpful, or should it be streamlined? Holger.
Maybe I can give it a start, and I would like to comment briefly on the H2 Global program, which I think is on one hand an excellent instrument, and we also might have projects to be applicable for this program, but it is obviously incentivizing projects outside of Europe, right? Which in a way is also not necessarily helpful in this initial phase, where we would also like to streamline and execute projects inside Europe. So I guess there needs to be a balance also with a certain system for projects inside Europe. And in our observation now, talking from the Norwegian perspective, there are a lot of projects lined up that we could bring to financial investment decision and then to execution very shortly. And there's also a lot of potential customers in the European Union, but we are still struggling to come together in a way, right? So we are discussing, and as you rightly say, it might end up in an LOI, but a real contract is still a problem because there are so many uncertainties. So a simple, stable, and reliable system or framework for a producer and a customer for hydrogen would be extremely helpful.
I fully support that, and I think it's necessary to do something in the operational phase, because I think there are quite good arrangements now in place, or partly at least, for investment support. But the challenge is when you start operating, because still in many markets, many applications, hydrogen will struggle to compete with the fossil alternatives, even though prices of CO2 is rising and we have CO2 tax, etc. So just to help on that situation, a scheme of contracts for difference or similar should be put in place, and should be put in place fast. That's, I think, something that could take out the risk for many, both investors and for the customers, to actually realize the project. And actually, when you have established a hydrogen production facility and the customer wants to take either use hydrogen or use something else as a fuel for their ship, then they can actually do it without losing too much money. So I think that's an important point. I'd like to comment on the delegated act as well, but I think we're going on to regulations a bit later as well, because there are...
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think the EU is making it extremely complicated for themselves by this delegated act. On the one hand, you want to push forward with hydrogen and have great ambitious targets for it, etc. And then you put in place some rules and regulations which makes it so difficult to get started. You just mentioned some of the complexities. So, I mean, yes, I think we all realize that you need new renewable production to make going into the future. So additionality in the long-term perspective, absolutely. But if you want to get started fast, you need to have more lenient rules now in the beginning. Otherwise, you will halt the developments.
Okay, so there's still, I think, 3 or 4 days time left to send some notes to
Yes.
Brussels, as far as I understand.
Forthcoming.
Yeah. So Mr. Kaufmann, you sing the song of H2 Global. It's a good instrument. We need long-term financing. Unfortunately, Norway is in Europe and cannot be supported by H2 Global, as far as I understand it. So will H2 Global will be further developed, also to include some European countries that may be around the North Sea? What kind of development do you see ahead?
Okay, it was not my idea, to be honest. It was the idea of the Ministry of Economy, together with some GSZ, for example. So the instrument is indeed not for Europe. So, and I think it won't be developed in that context that it will be applicable for European countries. So we have to find other instruments for incenting cooperation in this point. So H2 Global is really the idea is to bring countries outside of Europe as deliveries to Europe, to Germany. That was the idea, and that's the idea of H2 Global Europe, but it's not in between Europe.
Okay, so maybe talking a little bit about regulation and keep it simple and stupid, as I was learned in my engineering university. We see that with LNG that suddenly things are moving extremely fast. Yeah, we are building LNG terminals in 6 months or 10 months, 12 months. We're licensing them and then we're building them, but it's going fast. For an onshore wind farm, we need 7 years. For an offshore wind farm, we need 10 years. So what can we as an industry, what can the industry do to really come to a simple, fast-moving system? What do we need in the regulation? Maybe Christian?
Well, it was also mentioned already, right, that as far as the mobile LNG terminals are concerned, or the LNG terminals, we have the LNG acceleration law. And I think it's kind of a promising example, right, to kind of take this law on planning and on permissions also to the hydrogen economy. And I would wish that in one of these packages that the German government will propose soon, that some of those processes will also be adopted for the scaling up of renewables, which we will need, and also to scale and ramp up the hydrogen economy. And as far as further regulation is concerned, I really wonder whether it's necessary, since all starting positions in all European countries are so extremely different, whether it's really necessary to have all this regulatory framework from Brussels at the moment. You know, I think you can introduce regulation at a much later date after we've kind of managed successfully to ramp up the hydrogen economy on its whole value chain. And I really wonder whether that is all really necessary at present.
Okay, Dr. Kaufmann, you see the colleagues in the Ministry of Economy work. It's really going fast now. So what do you see? What is needed from the regulation to speed things up for hydrogen?
There's a lot of criticism on the European regulation, and I'm sharing these critics, but we have to find a consensus between 27, 28 member states, and that is not easy. And the German position was also not that clear for several months after the federal elections last year, to be honest. And now I think we have to go the way through the parliamentarian procedures to bring some change in this regulation. I think on the government side, on the Commission side, it's the papers on the table. So we have to try some changes over the parliamentarian process. I think that's the only chance. There won't be a separate German law on what is green hydrogen, for example. So that was a clear statement of the Ministry of Economy in the last weeks.
Okay, so maybe a last topic for our round now. There seems to be a strong connection between offshore wind and hydrogen. If we look at the German legislation, there is a large chunk of the offshore wind is more or less reserved to produce hydrogen. Yeah, and we're doing interesting things, producing hydrogen directly offshore and then bringing it onshore, and we have a much higher capacity in a pipeline than in electricity grids. So if you look at the combination of offshore wind and offshore hydrogen production, where do you, Holger, where do you see the main tasks for us to deliver on that?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I think that's a good question, close to my heart. But let me comment. Let me comment to the previous topic. I like to be part of the European Union. Yeah, I have to admit, and I see so many advantages in being part of a bigger kind of partnership that I'm also willing to accept the potential downsides of this, especially in the last couple of months. Not saying that I'm really happy about all this, but still maybe worth saying. Now, when it comes to offshore and hydrogen, this to me is the prime example of why Norway and Germany should cooperate even closer. I mean, there is so much offshore wind potential in Norway, and there is obviously now finally ambitious targets by the German government for offshore wind, and bringing all this together and realizing that probably the few landfalls that we are having, especially on the German North Sea coast for cables, will not be sufficient for all this capacity. I think the obvious solution is you create a hydrogen pipeline from Norway or more pipelines, and you connect directly offshore hydrogen production from offshore wind. That to me is a really obvious kind of solution, and you know, Jan, that there is this Aquaventus initiative that ARCA now is also happy to be a member of, and we are now helping with all the other members to promote this idea further, and I think there is a lot of support from both governments, but again, it's a little bit slow in a way. And I think it can be realized bilaterally between those two countries in a relatively short time period.
Thank you, Holger. I think it's important that you reminded us of the importance of the European Union. With all the criticism on the delegated act, we should not forget that. Dr. Kaufmann, you wanted to add to that?
You mentioned offshore hydrogen production. So we have this H2 Mare project I already talked about 100 million. It's about offshore production of hydrogen, and I was in Scotland a few weeks ago, and that was very interesting because they have a lot of stranded wind because the UK grid can't take all this additional wind energy. And I think it's a completely same situation like in Norway, a lot of offshore wind potential, floating wind potential, and they were talking about floating electrolyzers, and that was very interesting for me because I think at the moment we are not quite clear, is it really possible to produce hydrogen on electrolyzer on the floating in the rough sea. So some stakeholders told me it's possible, others are a little bit skeptical. But anyway, that could be very interesting. I would really like to put also Scotland in the picture because a pipeline between Scotland and Norway down to Europe, down to Hamburg, to Rotterdam, that would be very, really interesting to do it together. And I saw this Equinor pipeline, the CO2 pipeline, up to the storage facilities. So building a pipeline back exactly this way, that could be really interesting. And I think that it's a project we should working together. Scotland, United Kingdom, Norway, Germany, Denmark maybe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Christian?
Yeah. Minister Hagemann said it this morning that Hamburg is, of course, not only a big city, it's also a huge industrial site. Now, let me put some facts and figures to that. We have a consumption of natural gas in Hamburg of about 21 terawatt hours. That amounts to 2 billion cubic meter of natural gas. So roughly, as you all know, the factor 3 to 4, we need about 6 to 8 billion cubic meter of hydrogen to decarbonize, defossilize the Hamburg system, right? And kind of taking away efficiency, 2 billion cubic meter, maybe electrification to another, we still need 4 billion cubic meter of hydrogen. Now, as I said, well, we have this project on 100 megawatt electrolyzer capacity in Moorburg, which could be scaled up to 1 gigawatt. That would still not be enough, right? So as far as Hamburg or northern Germany is concerned, we think there's a place for everything, right? We will have local electrolysis, which has a high efficiency because it can utilize the oxygen, can also utilize the waste heat that's produced locally, but we need import structure for ammonia. And I was extremely excited to hear about the projects that we've heard. And there is some research and development because future CHPs, I think, could be run directly on ammonia, right? You don't need to do any other further processes on that. And we also need the European hydrogen backbone. And that's the hyperlink 1 to 3. And if I look at what is needed in North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, right, there is a lot of hydrogen that doesn't even arrive in Hamburg. So I'd be very pleased to hear that this exciting project, putting a direct pipeline from Norway to Germany, would come into existence because that would make sure, I mean, that we have the necessary imports and the necessary hydrogen that we need to defossilize our industry.
Ulf, from your side, what's your take on offshore wind and the infrastructure and the connection to hydrogen?
Just starting off with a small comment on the previous statement, also on what should we say, regulations, because I think putting in place regulations that can enable production of green hydrogen onshore more quickly than today would be very helpful, and that is shortening the licensing periods for renewable power, making it easier to get grid connections, stuff like that. And I don't know what the situation is in Germany, but that's at least a challenge in Norway. And I think we should keep in mind, try to do something in the short term as well, because these projects that we talk about offshore is definitely going to be very important. The pipeline is going to be important. The European hydrogen backbone is going to be important, but it's going to take a long time. So we need to speed up and do something where it's possible to do it a bit faster. And that's a small point on the green hydrogen, because I think we've said many times now that blue hydrogen will start off the market. We think we need both, but we think the first start is actually green hydrogen because you can do it faster, you can do it in small scale and get the ball running. On offshore wind and offshore hydrogen production, as I said, definitely it's going to be a big part of this. And whether you produce it offshore, the hydrogen production, or onshore, it's of course for the smaller scale and the what should we say, not so long distance, then power the grid is better. So sending it onshore and produce hydrogen onshore. But if the distance increases a bit and the scale increases, as we foresee with Aquaventus and others, then offshore production of hydrogen is a very interesting opportunity.
So maybe I hear from this panel, the Norwegian hydrogen pipeline could be actually an important backbone also for connecting the offshore wind from the German sector of the North Sea, all the other sectors. So that's maybe an important message from this panel discussion. So, especially on the field of regulation, a last question. If you had one wish for the regulation, what would that be to speed up hydrogen? Maybe, Mr. Kaufmann, start with you. One wish free.
Yes, at least from European side to allow us to have this carbon contracts for difference in the bigger scale. That would be helpful if we can't change this regulated act now.
All right. Ulf, what's your wish?
The same.
All right.
Contract.
I think actually there are quite many wishes actually, because I think as far as, and also the Ukrainian war shows this, right? Do we need state aid act on every procedure of funding that is necessary? But maybe we can relax it a bit, because the notification process take ages. And also, is notification necessary for the necessary funding? We've discussed that on the European level, and you could actually also kind of take it down for 1 or 2 years and then kind of reintroduce it again, just to make the market ramp up possible. We talked about delegated act. I think there's still a bit to do also as far as the German government is concerned, because I don't really think they have put the foot in the door in Brussels as much as we needed. The gas market package I've already discussed, because I don't think we need full legal ownership unbundling. What would this mean, right? As a Hamburg gas grid operator, I enable the entire infrastructure for a hydrogen grid operation. And then what? I sell it to Macquarie? That can't be a solution. And I think that's also not economically sensible. And as far as CFDs is concerned, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you could also say, what brings kind of prices down of hydrogen, right? We've said research and development, mass production, but also the price of electricity. And if I look at the state-induced components of our energy prices in Germany, I think there's also something to do. Okay.
That was more than one wish, I would say. But I noticed there is some pain in the unbundling issue for you, yeah? Yeah, okay. So Holger, your wish.
I support the wish of Dr. Kaufmann and Ulf, but I have also, and this is regarding regulation, but I have a wish for all of us is let's get going. Yeah, let's not only talk about it and try to wait for the other to get going. Let's all make it happen. Yeah, because now we have, I think, a unique chance to lift it off. And I was talking earlier to some colleagues here that like 10 years ago we were at probably a similar situation, and it didn't materialize for one or the other reason. But now we have all the ingredients at hand, and it's on us here to make it happen.
All right.
Act fast, think big, act fast.
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard, let's get going. CCFDs, we need some kind of regulation, and we need to be a little bit less bureaucratic. Yeah. Let's get going. Okay.
Oh, say let's
go. Okay, I think we can agree on that. So thanks to the panel.